The scream sliced through the morning silence like a sharp blade. Nathan froze in the middle of the sidewalk, his recycling cart momentarily forgotten as his eyes locked on the scene before him. A black Mercedes was parked haphazardly, its doors ajar, and a schoolgirl in uniform was being dragged away by two men with threatening appearances. In that instant, every survival instinct screamed at him to walk away, to ignore what he was witnessing. But something stronger held him in place, perhaps the same force that kept him awake every night, collecting bottles and cardboard to support his ailing mother. At just 12 years old, Nathan already bore the weight of responsibilities that would make many adults falter. His green eyes, a legacy from a father he had never met, viewed the world with a maturity beyond his years. A battered cap partially covered his tousled brown hair, the only indulgence his simple life allowed. Life in the small apartment he shared with Amanda, his mother, was a daily battle against adversity. The peeling walls held stories of better days, before the chronic illness that prevented her from working. Even so, Amanda managed to transform that modest space into a home, filling every corner with love and dignity. Every morning, before the sun rose, Nathan roamed the streets of their neighborhood with his makeshift cart. His hands, already calloused from constant labor, meticulously sorted recyclable materials that would bring in a few extra coins for his mother's medication. The neighborhood still slept, except for the few workers hurrying to catch the first bus of the day. On that fateful morning, his routine was brutally interrupted by the scene unfolding near the school he attended. The girl, who couldn't have been older than he was, wore the uniform of a nearby private school, a world as distant from his as the stars in the sky. "Let me go. Help." Her voice was thick with panic. Nathan's heart raced. Amanda always warned him about the dangers of the city, about staying out of trouble. But something about this scene stirred a courage he didn't know he possessed. Moving stealthily closer, he managed to catch part of the men's conversation. "Calm down, princess. Your dad's going to pay a nice ransom for you." The girl, whose name he would later learn was Sophie, struggled futilely to break free. Tears streamed down her face as she begged to be released. Nathan knew he had to act quickly, but he also understood he couldn't confront the kidnappers directly. Years on the streets had taught Nathan every shortcut and hiding place in the neighborhood. He knew every alley, every passage between buildings, every vacant lot. That knowledge would be his only advantage against those men. With his heart pounding like a drum in his chest, Nathan grabbed a few glass bottles from his cart and hurled them against a nearby wall. The sound of shattering glass echoed down the silent street, creating the distraction he desperately needed. The kidnappers, momentarily startled, loosened their grip on Sophie. Seizing the opportunity, Nathan ran toward them, shouting at the top of his lungs, "Police! The police are coming!" The ensuing confusion was his chance. As the men glanced around, searching for signs of approaching patrol cars, Nathan grabbed Sophie's hand and yanked her forcefully. "Run," he whispered urgently, leading her into the labyrinth of alleys he knew so well. The heavy footsteps behind them signaled that the kidnappers had recovered from their initial shock and were now in pursuit. Nathan's lungs burned as he ran, pulling Sophie through narrow passages and leaping over small obstacles. Despite her evident fear, the girl managed to keep up with his pace. "This way." Nathan directed her through an especially tight passage between two buildings. The kidnappers, larger and heavier, would struggle to follow them through it. The sound of their labored breathing and shouted curses grew fainter with each passing second. After what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few minutes, Nathan spotted their destination, Mr. Jose's grocery store. The small shop was his safe haven on the hardest days, a place to rest when exhaustion overtook him during his morning collection rounds. Jose, a gray-haired man with a kind smile, was just opening the store when he saw them sprinting toward him. One look at their terrified faces was enough to convey the gravity of the situation. Without asking any questions, he quickly ushered them inside, locking the door behind them and guiding them to the storeroom at the back of the shop. "Stay here," Jose instructed, picking up the phone to call the police. "You're safe now." In the small storeroom, surrounded by boxes of goods and dusty shelves, Sophie finally caught her breath. Her tear-filled eyes fixed on Nathan, a mixture of gratitude and curiosity shining through. "Why did you help me?" she asked, her voice still trembling. "You could have been hurt, or worse." Nathan shrugged, a gesture that carried all the simplicity and nobility of his character. "My mom always says it's the right thing to help others, no matter who they are." He paused, his gaze lingering on Sophie's expensive uniform and her poised demeanor. "Even if they're from a different world than ours?" Sophie opened her mouth to respond, but the sound of approaching sirens cut her off. Within minutes, the small grocery store was surrounded by police cars and private security vehicles. A commanding voice could be heard outside, demanding to be let in. Jose unlocked the door, revealing Robert Maxwell, an imposing man in an impeccably tailored suit. His usually composed face was etched with worry. "Sophie," he called, his voice betraying the fear he had felt. "Thank God you're safe." Sophie ran into her father's arms and he held her tightly. It was only then that Robert noticed Nathan, still standing amidst the boxes in the storeroom. The businessman froze as if he had seen a ghost. The boy before him was the spitting image of his younger brother, Michael, who had disappeared 13 years ago after a heated argument over the family business inheritance. What's your name?" Robert asked, his voice slightly trembling. "Nathan Silva," the boy replied, confused by the man's reaction. Robert felt the ground vanish beneath his feet. Silva, the surname of his mother, a name he hadn't heard in years. The physical resemblance, the age, the surname. It all fit together like pieces of a macabre puzzle he never imagined existed. "And your mother?" he asked, already dreading the answer. "What's her name?" "Amanda," Nathan replied, growing increasingly puzzled by the interrogation. "Amanda Silva?" Robert's world began to spin. Amanda had been Michael's girlfriend before his disappearance. She had vanished from their lives around the same time, and now Robert understood why. She had been pregnant and chose to shield her child from a family she deemed toxic and corrupt. At that moment, watching the boy who had risked his life to save his daughter, Robert felt the weight of 13 years of absence and neglect. Nathan wasn't just the brave boy who saved Sophie. He was his nephew, Michael's son, and the rightful heir to part of the Maxwell empire. The revelation struck Robert like lightning, bringing with it a storm of conflicting emotions. How could he make up for so many lost years? How could he explain to Nathan that he was part of one of the wealthiest and most powerful families in the country? More importantly, how could he do so without shattering the boy's evident purity of character? Fate had orchestrated an encounter that would forever change the lives of everyone involved. Nathan, who had started the day as a humble recycler, was about to discover he was the heir to a corporate empire. But wealth and power would come at a price that would test not only his integrity but also the bonds of love and loyalty that defined who he was. The small apartment had never felt as cramped as it did that afternoon. Amanda sat in her worn armchair, her hands trembling slightly as she held a cup of tea that had long gone cold. Across from her, Robert Maxwell occupied nearly the entire room with his imposing presence. The stark contrast between his impeccably tailored Italian suit and the peeling walls of the apartment could not have been greater. "Why did you never reach out to us, Amanda?" Robert's voice carried a mix of hurt and disbelief. "You knew Michael was part of the family. Nathan had a right to..." "A right to what, Robert?" Amanda cut him off, her brown eyes flashing with a strength her frail body could no longer show. "A right to the same toxic environment that made his brother disappear? A right to grow up in a place consumed by power struggles and greed?" Nathan watched the scene unfold from the narrow hallway leading to the bedrooms, his heart torn between loyalty to his mother and curiosity about this family he had just discovered. Sophie stood beside him, equally captivated by the tension between the adults. "Things have changed, Amanda," Robert continued, his voice softer now. "I've changed. Seeing Nathan today saving my Sophie, it was like Michael was there, giving me a second chance." Amanda let out a weary sigh. The chronic pain that tormented her seemed sharper in that moment. "Michael believed things could change too, Robert. He trusted that you all could turn the company into something more than a money-making machine. And where is he now?" The silence that followed was heavy, laden with unanswered questions and unspoken accusations. Nathan felt Sophie lightly touch his arm, a gesture of solidarity that took him by surprise. "I know I made mistakes," Robert admitted, running a tired hand over his face. "But Nathan is my nephew. He's a Maxwell whether you accept it or not. After what happened today, I can't just ignore his existence." Amanda looked at her son, her eyes brimming with tears. Nathan had never seen her cry before, not even on the days when the pain was nearly unbearable. "Nathan is a Silva," she declared firmly. "He has his father's heart, but he grew up far from the influence of money and power. And look at the result. A boy who risks his own life to save a stranger without expecting anything in return." Robert stood and walked over to the window overlooking the bustling street below. Outside, his security team remained vigilant next to the armored car. "That's exactly why I need him in our lives, Amanda. Sophie has never had a real friend, someone who cared about her for more than just our last name. Today, for the first time, I saw my daughter smile genuinely since her mother left us. The mention of Sophie's mother made Nathan glance at his cousin differently. There was a familiar sadness in her eyes, something he recognized from his own solitary mornings. I'm not asking you to abandon your life, Robert continued. I just want the chance to help, to be part of your lives. Nathan deserves to know his roots, to have access to a good education. I already have a good education, Nathan finally spoke, catching everyone off guard. My mom taught me what really matters. Robert turned to face him, a bittersweet smile playing on his lips. Yes, that's clear, Nathan. But you could have so much more. You could attend the same school as Sophie, have all the opportunities your father never had. For what? Amanda interrupted, her voice trembling with emotion. So he can become another heartless executive? Another person who only cares about profits and results? No, Sophie interjected unexpectedly, her voice soft but resolute. So he can change things like Uncle Michael wanted. Nathan is different, Aunt Amanda. He showed me that today. The use of aunt caught Amanda off guard. She looked at the niece she had just met, noticing for the first time how much the girl resembled Michael in his youth. The same determination in her eyes, the same ability to see beyond the surface. Maybe, Nathan began, carefully choosing his words, maybe we can give it a try. We don't have to change who we are to get to know this part of the family, do we, Mom? Amanda felt her heart tighten. Her son had always possessed a wisdom beyond his years, an ability to see the good in people that she had lost after years of disappointment. I have a proposal, Robert said, seizing the moment. Let me help with your health issues, Amanda. There are specialists, treatments that could improve your quality of life. In return, let Nathan attend the same school as Sophie, let him get to know his father's family. Not as an obligation but as a choice. The silence that followed was broken only by the distant hum of traffic. Amanda looked at her son, the boy she had raised on her own, who woke up before dawn to help her, who never complained about the hard life they led. If it's what you want, Nathan, she finally said, her voice barely a whisper. The choice is yours. Nathan walked over to his mother, kneeling beside her chair. I want you to get better, Mom. And I want to learn about this part of my story. But I'll never forget who I am or who made me this way. Robert watched the scene unfold with a lump in his throat. In Nathan, he didn't just see his missing brother's son. He saw a chance for redemption for the entire Maxwell family. The boy had the integrity they had lost somewhere along the way, smothered by years of unchecked ambition. Let's do this right this time, Robert vowed, more to himself than to the others. No pressure, no expectations. Just a family trying to reconnect. Sophie, who had been quiet until now, stepped closer to Nathan with a shy smile. You'll like the school, she said. And I'll love having a cousin around. The rest of the afternoon was spent discussing practical details. Robert insisted on arranging an immediate consultation with the best specialists for Amanda. Nathan listened carefully as the adults talked about school uniforms, necessary documents, and other preparations. When Robert and Sophie finally said their goodbyes, it was already evening. Nathan accompanied them to the car, watching the city lights begin to flicker on. Sophie gave him a quick hug before getting into the vehicle, a gesture that seemed to seal a silent alliance between them. See you on Monday, cousin, she smiled, waving from the car window as they drove away. Nathan climbed the stairs back to the apartment, finding his mother still in the armchair, lost in thought. It's going to be okay, Mom, he said, taking her hand. We won't lose who we are just because we meet who we could have been. Amanda pulled her son into a tight embrace, letting a few tears escape. You're already wiser than all the Maxwells put together, my son. Just promise me you'll stay that way. That night marked the beginning of a new phase in Nathan and Amanda's lives. As the city slept, mother and son stayed awake, talking about the past and the future, about fears and hopes, about the strange way destiny sometimes chooses to surprise us. At the Maxwell mansion, Robert was also awake, flipping through old photographs of Michael. In each image of his younger brother, he now saw traces of Nathan. How had he not noticed before how much he had lost by allowing power and money to dictate his choices? Maybe Sophie was right. Maybe Nathan was exactly what the family needed to find their way back to the humanity they had forgotten. The first Monday at the new school arrived with a palpable tension in the air. Nathan adjusted his tie for the 10th time, feeling like an imposter in his own clothes. The fine, well-tailored fabric was completely different from anything he had ever worn. Robert had insisted on sending his personal driver to pick them up, but Nathan preferred to take the bus with his mother. Amanda, still recovering from her first specialized treatment session, insisted on going with him. The chronic pain was still present, but there was a new spark in her eyes, a mix of hope and apprehension. "Do you remember what we agreed on?" Amanda asked, holding her son's hand as they walked toward the imposing school gates. "You shouldn't. I shouldn't feel inferior or superior to anyone," Nathan finished, smiling. "I'm just me, no matter what uniform I'm wearing." The school hallways seemed endless, and every curious look from the other students made Nathan feel the weight of his difference. Some whispered as he passed, others simply stared with that typical adolescent curiosity at something new. Sophie was waiting for him at the entrance to his classroom, a genuine smile lighting up her face. "Welcome to St. Patrick's," she said, pulling him inside. "It's going to be great having you here." The first classes were an emotional roller coaster. Nathan, always dedicated to his studies even in public school, found that the level of expectation was considerably higher. While he excelled in math and science, he struggled to keep up with English and French, subjects that weren't even part of his old curriculum. During the break, Sophie introduced him to her small circle of friends. Thomas, the son of the British ambassador, and Olivia, whose mother was a famous plastic surgeon, greeted him with a mix of curiosity and caution. "So, you're Sophie's cousin?" Thomas asked, his British accent revealing his origin. "The son of Uncle Michael?" Nathan noticed how the mention of his father caused a sudden silence in the group. Sophie gave Thomas a warning look, but it was too late. "Yes, I'm his son," Nathan replied simply. "But I've never met him." "No one really knew him," Olivia commented, her voice low but clear. "Dad said he was the only Maxwell who cared more about people than profits. Maybe that's why he disappeared." Olivia's words planted a seed of unease in Nathan's mind. Throughout his life, he had accepted the simple explanation that his father had abandoned his mother. But now, immersed in the world of the Maxwells, he was beginning to realize there was much more to the story than he had imagined. After classes, while waiting for his mother in the library, Nathan began researching the disappearance of Michael Maxwell in the digital archives of old newspapers. The headlines told a fragmented story: "Maxwell heir disappears after tense meeting," "Police investigate possible kidnapping of reformist executive," "Maxwell case remains unresolved." "You shouldn't be looking into this," a deep voice startled him. It was George Williams, the elderly librarian who had worked at the school for over 3 decades. "Some stories are better left in the past." Nathan quickly closed the browser, but his curiosity was just beginning. "Did you know my father?" he asked, noticing how the librarian's eyes widened in recognition. George hesitated for a moment, looking around as if to make sure they were alone. "Michael was different from the other Maxwells," he began, his voice barely more than a whisper. "He wanted to turn the company into something more than a money-making machine. He talked about social responsibility, about using the family's power to do good." "And was that a problem?" Nathan asked, feeling his heart race. "For some, yes," George replied enigmatically. "Especially after he started investigating some irregularities in the company's contracts." The librarian seemed to regret speaking too much almost instantly. "Forget what I said," he murmured, walking away quickly. "Some truths are too dangerous." That evening, during dinner at the Maxwell estate, a new routine established by Robert, Nathan observed his uncle with new eyes. The man who seemed so remorseful and eager for family reconnection had, according to the newspapers, been one of the main opponents of Michael's reformist ideas. Sophie, seated beside him, seemed to notice his unease. "Are you okay?" she whispered as the adults discussed business. "I don't know," Nathan replied honestly. "Have you ever wondered what really happened to my dad?" Sophie's face grew serious. "Every day," she admitted. "But Dad never talks about it. It's like it's a forbidden topic." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Victor Lancaster, vice president of Maxwell Enterprises and Robert's right-hand man for over 20 years. It was the first time Nathan had met him, but something about the calculated smile on the executive's face sent a chill down his spine. "So, this is young Nathan," Victor remarked, his cold eyes studying the boy with disturbing intensity. "The resemblance to Michael is truly striking." Robert seemed uncomfortable with the observation. "Nathan is adjusting well to school," he said quickly, changing the subject. "Sophie has been an excellent guide." "Undoubtedly," Victor replied, his gaze still fixed on Nathan. "I only hope he inherited just his father's looks and not his controversial ideas." The comment caused an awkward silence at the table. Nathan felt his blood boil, but years of living through hardship had taught him to control his emotions. "My father wanted to use the company's power to help people," he said calmly, surprising everyone. "I don't see anything controversial about that." Victor let out a humorless laugh. "Ah, the innocence of youth." Business is business, young man. Your father never understood that, and look where it got him. Victor. Robert intervened sharply. That's enough. But the damage was done. Victor's words, combined with Robert's overreaction and Nathan's discoveries in the library, painted a disturbing picture. Nathan was beginning to suspect that his father's disappearance had not been a simple abandonment, it was part of something much larger and far more sinister. Later, in his modest room at the apartment he still shared with his mother, they had politely declined Robert's offer to move into the mansion. Nathan began organizing his findings. In a brand new notebook, he jotted down every suspicious detail. The dates from the newspapers, the librarian's words, Victor Lancaster's reaction. A soft knock at the door interrupted him. It was Amanda holding a small shoebox. I think it's time you saw this, she said, sitting on the edge of the bed. These are the last letters your father sent me before he disappeared. With trembling hands, Nathan opened the first letter. The handwriting was firm, determined, as though every word had been chosen with care. Dear Amanda, I've discovered something terrible about the company. I can't go into details in a letter, but I must expose the truth. Robert is blinded by power, manipulated by people who care about nothing but profit. If anything happens to me, seek out George at the St. Patrick's Library. He knows where to find the evidence. With love, Michael. Nathan felt his world spin. The letter confirmed what he had begun to suspect. His father hadn't simply abandoned his family. He had been on the verge of exposing something big, something that had cost him his life or his freedom. Why are you showing me this now? He asked, his voice trembling slightly. Amanda took a deep breath. Because I saw the way Victor Lancaster looked at you today. It's the same look he had when he spoke to your father. The look of someone who sees a threat that needs to be eliminated. The second major turning point of the story was clear. Nathan wasn't just the lost Maxwell heir. He might be the key to unraveling the mystery of his father's disappearance. A discovery that set him on a collision course with powerful people willing to do anything to keep their secrets buried. The library at St. Patrick's had become Nathan's refuge during breaks between classes. Among the ancient wooden shelves, he felt closer to the father he had never known. George, the librarian, now watched him with a mixture of concern and complicity, as if they shared a burden too heavy to speak aloud. Your father used to sit right here, George remarked one particularly quiet afternoon, placing a cup of tea on the desk where Nathan was studying. He preferred the silence here to the noise of the courtyard. Nathan looked up from his calculus book, studying the wrinkled face of the older man. You mentioned he was investigating irregularities in the company. What kind of irregularities? George adjusted his glasses nervously, glancing around before taking a seat. Overpriced contracts, rigged bids, bribes? Michael uncovered a scheme involving millions. But the worst part wasn't the money, it was what they did with it. What do you mean? Influence peddling, buying off politicians, crushing competitors? George lowered his voice even further. Your father discovered that Maxwell Enterprises wasn't just a company, it was the heart of a corruption network that stretched across the entire corporate sector. Nathan felt a chill run down his spine. And who was behind it all? Victor Lancaster, George replied, the name sounding like a verdict. He was the architect of the entire scheme. Robert? Well, Robert was too busy being the public face of the company to notice what was happening behind the scenes. The revelation hit Nathan like a bombshell. His uncle wasn't the villain of the story, he was just another pawn on Victor Lancaster's chessboard. It explained why Robert seemed genuinely remorseful and eager to reconnect with the family. Michael gathered evidence, George continued, his voice trembling slightly. Documents, recordings, bank records. Everything was on a flash drive he kept as his insurance policy. And where is that flash drive now? The librarian smiled mysteriously. Your father was brilliant with codes and riddles. He left clues only someone with Maxwell blood could decipher. Before Nathan could ask more questions, approaching voices interrupted them. Sophie entered the library, followed by Thomas and Olivia. His new friends had become unexpected allies in recent weeks. Nathan, you need to see this, Sophie said, her voice laden with urgency. She carried an old yellowed folder. I found it in my dad's office. The folder contained newspaper clippings about the social projects Michael had tried to implement within the company. Schools in underserved communities, professional training programs, environmental initiatives, all canceled after his disappearance. Look at the date of this last project, Olivia pointed out. It was approved the day before your father disappeared. Thomas, who had remained silent until then, finally spoke. My dad mentioned something about this the other day. He said Maxwell Enterprises was once considered a model of social responsibility until Victor Lancaster took control of the finances. The pieces of the puzzle were beginning to fall into place. Michael hadn't simply disappeared. He had been silenced before he could expose the truth about the company. But why did Victor Lancaster remain so powerful? Why did Robert even now seem incapable of standing up to him? The answer came unexpectedly during a dinner at the Maxwell mansion. Nathan observed the interaction between his uncle and Victor, noticing how Robert seemed visibly tense whenever the vice president was around. That's when it hit him. Victor Lancaster wasn't just the architect of the corruption. He had something on Robert, something that kept him under control. "Uncle Robert," Nathan called out when they were finally alone in the mansion's library. "I need to ask you something about my dad." Robert visibly stiffened but nodded. "What do you want to know? Why didn't you ever really investigate his disappearance? Why do you let Victor Lancaster keep running everything?" Robert's face paled. "Things are more complicated than they seem, Nathan. Victor. He has evidence that could destroy not just the company but our entire family." "What kind of evidence?" "Documents implicating your grandfather in illegal dealings. If that comes to light, it won't just be the end of Maxwell Enterprises, it'll be the end of everything our family has built for generations." Nathan felt anger rising in his chest. "And what about what happened to my dad? Doesn't the truth matter?" "Of course it matters." Robert burst out, tears welling in his eyes. "Michael was my brother. But Victor is like a hydra, cut off one head and two more grow in its place. He has connections everywhere, powerful people who protect him." "Then let's expose everything," Nathan suggested, his voice steady and resolute. "Clear the family name once and for all." Robert looked at his nephew with a mix of pride and fear. "You're just like your father. But that's what scares me. Michael also believed he could take on the system alone, and look what happened." "He's not alone," Sophie said, stepping into the library doorway. She had overheard the entire conversation. "We're in this together, cousin." Nathan smiled at his cousin, a wave of gratitude washing over him. In just a few weeks, Sophie had become more than a friend. She was an ally, a partner in his quest for the truth. "We need to find the flash drive," Nathan declared. "George said my father left clues that only a Maxwell could decipher." Robert frowned. "What kind of clues?" "I'm not sure yet. But if we work together we can figure it out. It's time to face our fears, Uncle Robert. It's time to honor my father's legacy." The silence that followed was broken by the sound of footsteps in the hallway. Victor Lancaster appeared in the doorway, his false smile more menacing than ever. "What a charming family reunion," he remarked, his cold eyes scanning every face in the room. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." Nathan met the gaze of the man who was likely responsible for his father's disappearance. In that moment he made a silent vow. No matter the cost, he would uncover the truth and deliver justice. The war had only just begun, and this time, the Maxwells would stand united against their true enemy. The tension in the room was palpable, heavy with secrets and veiled threats. The power game that had torn a family apart years ago was about to restart, but this time with new players and new rules. Nathan knew every step would have to be carefully calculated. One mistake could cost them not just their chance at justice but also the safety of everyone he cared about. Michael Maxwell's old office had remained untouched since his disappearance, like a mausoleum dedicated to his memory. Nathan ran his hand over the dusty surface of the oak desk while Sophie kept watch at the door. Robert had granted them access after much insistence, though his unease was evident. "Are you sure your father would leave clues here?" Sophie asked, her nerves heightened by every creak of the old wooden floor. Nathan nodded, recalling George's words. "The librarian said my dad was obsessed with codes. He wouldn't leave such critical information without some kind of safeguard." The office was a snapshot frozen in time. Framed diplomas adorned the walls, accompanied by photographs of social projects. In one, Michael smiled alongside children at a school built by the company. Nathan felt a pang in his chest. It was like staring at his own reflection, aged a few years. "Look at this," Sophie called out, pointing to a series of numbers discreetly etched into the base of one of the frames. "It looks like a sequence." Nathan stepped closer, scrutinizing the numbers carefully. 7-15-19-5. These aren't just numbers. They're positions in the alphabet. "Jose," Sophie deciphered quickly. "Jose? Could this be connected to George at the library?" Before they could delve further into the discovery, voices echoed from the hallway. They quickly hid behind an old bookshelf. Victor Lancaster entered the office, flanked by two men Nathan didn't recognize. The boy is following in his father's footsteps, Victor said, his voice laced with frustration. We need to act before he uncovers anything. And what about Robert? One of the men asked. He seems to be switching sides. Victor chuckled darkly. Robert's a coward. As long as we have those documents about his father, he'll stay in line. The real problem is the boy, he has nothing to lose. Nathan felt Sophie squeeze his hand, a silent gesture of support and concern. They remained completely still until the men left, their hearts pounding so loudly they feared being discovered. We need to find that flash drive, Nathan whispered once they were alone again. It's the only way to free the family from this blackmail. Turning his attention back to the sequence of numbers, they began scouring the office for more clues. It was Sophie who noticed a pattern on the bookshelf. Some volumes bore tiny, almost imperceptible marks on their spines. Their coordinates, Nathan realized after piecing the markings together. And that word Jose must be a password. Their search led them back to the school library, where George awaited them with a mix of anxiety and hope. When they shared their findings, the elderly librarian smiled, tears welling in his eyes. Jose was Michael's father's name, he revealed. Your paternal grandfather. He died trying to expose corruption in another company. That's what inspired your father to fight for change within Maxwell Enterprises. George then removed a specific book from the shelf, revealing a hidden compartment. Inside was a yellowed envelope bearing Nathan's name, handwritten. Your father knew you'd come one day, George said softly. He left this for you? With trembling hands, Nathan opened the envelope. Inside was a letter and an old key. My dear son, if you're reading this, it means my suspicions were correct and something has happened to me. But it also means you've found your way back to the family, and I hope it's for the right reasons. The key opens a vault at the central bank. There, you will find all the evidence needed to expose the truth about Maxwell Enterprises. But be careful, this information is dangerous. Victor Lancaster and his associates won't hesitate to do whatever it takes to keep it secret. Trust Robert, he's not evil, just weak. And remember, the true legacy of the Maxwells isn't in money or power, but in the courage to do what's right. With love, your father. Nathan barely had time to process the contents of the letter when they heard a noise at the entrance of the library. Victor Lancaster stood at the door, his normally composed face twisted in a mask of rage. So you found it, he said, his voice cold. I'll admit I underestimated you, kid. Just like I underestimated your father. Two burly men followed him in, blocking the only exit. Sophie instinctively moved closer to Nathan, while George positioned himself protectively in front of the young pair. It's over, Victor, Nathan declared, his voice firm despite the fear. Now we have proof of everything. Victor smiled, a smile that didn't reach his eyes. You really think a bank vault can stop me? I built this empire in the shadows, kid. People like your father, who dream of changing the world, always end up realizing that the world doesn't want to be changed. What did you do to my father? Nathan asked, though he dreaded the answer. Let's just say he's resting in peace, in a place where his revolutionary ideas can no longer threaten our stability. The veiled confession hit Nathan like a punch to the stomach. Every ounce of hope he had left of finding his father alive shattered in that moment. Now, Victor continued, extending his hand, be a good boy and hand me that letter. Maybe then you'll have a different fate than your father. It was at that moment that Robert appeared at the library entrance, flanked by two police officers. His face was pale but determined. Enough, Victor, he said, his voice heavy with an authority long forgotten. It's over. The third turning point of the story had arrived, the confirmation of Michael's death and the final confrontation with his killer. But unlike his father, Nathan was not alone in this fight. By his side were Sophie, George, and now Robert, a united family finally ready to face their demons and fight for justice, no matter the cost. The silence in the library was deafening. Victor Lancaster looked at the police officers with studied calm, as if the situation were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Robert, he said, shaking his head in false disappointment. You really want to do this? Think of the consequences. I've thought long and hard, Victor, Robert replied, his voice firm. I've thought about all the nights I spent awake wondering what happened to my brother. I've thought about how I let you control this family with fear and threats. Nathan clutched his father's letter tightly, feeling the weight of every word written on that paper. Sophie remained by his side, her presence a quiet source of strength. The documents about your father, Victor began, but Robert interrupted him. They don't matter anymore. Nothing matters more than the truth about Michael. Victor laughed, a cold, calculated sound. The truth? The truth is that your brother was a foolish idealist who didn't understand how the world really works. He wanted to destroy everything we built, turn our company into a charity. He wanted to do the right thing. Nathan intervened, stepping forward. And you killed him for it? I protected our interests, Victor countered, his eyes now fixed on Nathan. Just like I'm trying to protect them now. You're exactly like him, young, naive, full of foolish ideals about changing the world. The officers moved forward, but Victor was quicker. With a fluid motion, he drew a gun from his suit jacket, aiming it directly at Nathan. Nobody moves, he ordered. Or the kid ends up like his father. Time seemed to freeze. Nathan could hear his own heart pounding, each beat a reminder that he was closer than ever to sharing Michael's fate. You won't shoot a teenager in front of witnesses, Victor, Robert said, trying to stay calm. It's over? Over? Victor laughed again, the sound now tinged with hysteria. Nothing is over as long as I'm in control. You really think that evidence means anything? I have connections that can make any proof disappear, just like I made Michael disappear. Where's my father's body? Nathan asked, his voice surprisingly steady. Victor's grin widened. In a place where no one will ever find it. It was a clean job, you know? No witnesses, no evidence. Just a troublesome executive who decided to abandon everything and disappear. You're wrong, a trembling voice called from the doorway. Amanda stood there holding a cell phone. Now there are witnesses. Victor's face drained of color as he realized his confession had been recorded. In that moment of distraction, Robert acted. With surprising speed for his age, he lunged at Victor, knocking the gun from his hand. The police immediately subdued Victor, who fought and shouted threats as he was handcuffed. You don't understand. I built all of this. I turned the Maxwells into what they are today. No, Nathan said, stepping closer to the man who had destroyed his family. You destroyed what the Maxwells could have been. My father saw it, and now we all see it too. As Victor was taken away by the police, Nathan opened the letter again, rereading his father's final words. The tears he had held back finally began to fall. Amanda approached, hugging her son tightly. Your father would be proud of you, she whispered. You did what he always wanted. You united the family and exposed the truth. Robert joined them, his face marked with tears of regret and relief. Forgive me, he said. I should have been stronger, I should have protected Michael. It wasn't your fault, Nathan replied, extending a hand to his uncle. Victor manipulated us all. But now we can start over, do things the right way. Sophie, who had been watching the scene with tear-filled eyes, finally spoke up. What about the company? With Victor in prison and all these revelations, the company will survive, Robert declared with renewed conviction. But this time, we'll run it the way Michael always wanted, with integrity, social responsibility, and a true commitment to the people. In the weeks that followed, Victor's recorded confession led to the discovery of a corruption network that extended far beyond Maxwell Enterprises. Executives were arrested, documents were revealed, and the truth about Michael's death finally came to light. The body was found exactly where Victor had indicated during the interrogations, in a remote area, buried beneath years of secrets and lies. The family was finally able to give a proper farewell, turning the pain of their loss into fuel for change. Nathan, now knowing the whole truth about his father, felt a mix of sadness and pride. Michael had died fighting for what he believed in, and his sacrifice had not been in vain. Maxwell Enterprises, under the new joint leadership of Robert and Amanda, was beginning a profound transformation, prioritizing social projects and ethical practices. The final turning point of the story was not just about justice being served, it was about a family finding redemption through the truth. Nathan discovered that his true legacy wasn't in the Maxwell name or the company's wealth, but in his father's courage to confront corruption and his mother's strength in protecting him. The school library, where it had all come to a head, became a symbol of that transformation. George, the faithful guardian of Michael's secrets, smiled as he watched Nathan and Sophie studying there every afternoon, knowing that the family's future was in good hands. The Maxwell empire had not collapsed as Victor had predicted. It had transformed into something better, something closer to the dream Michael had for it. And Nathan, the boy who had started this journey collecting recyclables to help his sick mother, was now ready to continue his father's legacy, not through power or money, but through the courage to always do what was right. A year had passed since Victor Lancaster's arrest. Autumn painted the trees of the cemetery in golden hues as Nathan placed flowers on the freshly constructed grave of Michael Maxwell. The simple gravestone stood in contrast to the grandeur of the name it bore, a deliberate choice that reflected the values for which his father had fought and died. Amanda, now fully recovered thanks to specialized treatments, stood by his side. Her face, once marked by chronic pain, now showed a serenity that only truth and justice could bring. Robert, Sophie, and dozens of Maxwell Enterprises employees were also present for the ceremony, which marked not only Michael's final rest but also the rebirth of the company under a new philosophy. "My brother dreamed of a company that could change lives," Robert began his speech, his voice thick with emotion. He believed that economic power should serve the greater good. Today we can finally say that his dream is becoming a reality. Maxwell Enterprises had undergone a profound transformation over the past year. Under the joint management of Robert and Amanda, who brought her experience in social work to the board, the company established a foundation dedicated to educational projects in underserved communities. The first one, ironically, was built in the same neighborhood where Nathan and Amanda had lived. "It's strange being here," Sophie whispered to her cousin as the guests dispersed after the ceremony. "Finally saying goodbye to Uncle Michael, but feeling like he's more present than ever." Nathan nodded, fully understanding what she meant. In recent months, every decision made at the company seemed guided by his father's spirit. The social projects Victor had buried were resurrected and expanded. Unethical practices were exposed and corrected. Transparency became more than a buzzword, it was a daily commitment. George, the librarian who had kept Michael's secrets for so long, now ran a scholarship program for talented young people from low-income families. His library at St. Patrick's had become a symbol of transformation and hope. "Your father would be proud," Amanda said, adjusting the blazer she now wore as part of her new role at the company. "Not just for what we've done, but for the man you've become." Nathan smiled, thinking about how much his life had changed. He still lived in the same apartment with his mother, a conscious choice to keep his feet on the ground, but now he divided his time between studying and learning about the company. Robert had insisted that he get to know every department, starting from the bottom, just as Michael had done. "Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing enough," Nathan confessed as they walked back to the cars. "If I'm truly honoring his legacy." "You're doing more than you realize," Sophie replied, linking her arm with her cousin's. "Remember last week when you convinced the board to approve the recycling project? The one that's going to employ former waste pickers?" Nathan smiled at the memory. The project had stemmed from his own experience on the streets, collecting recyclable materials. Now, Maxwell Enterprises was setting up recycling centers managed by cooperatives, offering decent jobs and benefits for people who, like him in the past, had struggled to survive. Robert approached the group, his eyes still red from emotion. "I've got something to show you," he said, leading them to his car. 20 minutes later, they parked in front of a large plot of land on the outskirts of the city. A sign read, "Future Michael Maxwell Institute Vocational Training and Community Development Center." "This is going to be our biggest project yet," Robert explained as they walked around the site. "Technical courses, a small business incubator, a daycare for working mothers. Everything your father dreamed of, all in one place." Amanda squeezed her son's hand, her eyes misty. "And to think just a year ago we were struggling to buy his medicine?" "Life has a funny way of working out," Nathan reflected. "All this wealth, all this power. In the end, what really matters is how we use it to help others." The sun was beginning to set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Nathan looked out over the empty land, imagining how it would look in a few months, filled with people seeking a chance for change. His father had died fighting for this dream, but his sacrifice had planted a seed that was now beginning to bloom. "Do you know what makes me the most proud?" Robert said, placing a hand on his nephew's shoulder. "To see that you haven't let money or power change who you are. You've held on to the values your mother taught you, even though you now have access to everything you've ever dreamed of." "It wasn't easy," Nathan admitted. "Sometimes I still feel torn between two worlds." "There aren't two worlds," Sophie interjected. "It's just one world that needs more people like you, like Uncle Michael, like Aunt Amanda. People who understand that true success isn't measured by how much you have, but by how much you can help." The group fell silent for a few moments, contemplating the future that lay before them. Maxwell Enterprises was no longer just a company, it was an instrument of social transformation, exactly as Michael had dreamed. Nathan took the letter from his father out of his pocket, the one he always carried with him. The words were worn with time, but he still found comfort in reading them. The true legacy of the Maxwells isn't in money or power, but in the courage to do what's right. And so, as the sun set over the future Michael Maxwell Institute, Nathan understood that his journey hadn't ended. In fact, it was just beginning. The boy who collected recyclables to help his sick mother had transformed into a young leader using his newly discovered privilege to make a difference in the lives of others. The story of the Maxwells was no longer about power and money, it was about redemption, about turning pain into purpose, about honoring the sacrifice of a man who gave his life fighting for what he believed in. And Nathan, carrying the blood of both the Silva and Maxwell families, was determined to continue that fight, one day at a time. And what about you? What did you think of this story of transformation and redemption? Leave your thoughts in the comments. If you were moved by Nathan's journey and want more intense stories like this, don't forget to like and subscribe to the Life Stories channel. It helps us grow and continue bringing inspiring stories to you. See you next time.